And welcome to the Audio Imaginarium. Come on in, weary traveler. Hang your cloak on a peg. Grab a stool and come gather around the fire. There are stories to be told, and you are among friends. It's been a while since I've been here in the studio at Zoomerplex. I forgot to hit the red button that says mic on. A learning curve. However, I will persevere. Retired police detective Ingrid P. Dean is here, and she is standing by. She'll be with us for the full 2 hours discussing the metaphysical and spiritual elements of police work. As I say, nice being back in studio. And a great meeting my new technical producer, Owen Wolf, in person. My live stream producer is Ryan White. He's running the YouTube live stream. Yes, we are streaming live on YouTube. The YouTube channel is Strange Planet, and you can check it out there, Strange Planet. Be sure to hit that red sub button. We're somewhere north of 16,000 subscribers. Maybe one of these days we'll hit 20. Can you help us? Can you help us get there? Police are often guided by something that's difficult to express in words. Angels, spirit, divine intervention. Even police officers are not always sure. However, the 60 true police stories that make up Ingrid Dean's Spirit of the Badge leave little room for doubt. We are bigger than we think we are. Every day, police officers can face life or death situations that can call for decisions made in the blink of an eye. There's often no time for reasoning. So, cops learn to trust their guts. They learn to become comfortable with uncertainty. The men and women in blue rely on more than the letter of the law and the facts of the case when they protect and serve. They receive aid from God, dreams, signs, and symbols. But like the rest of us, officers can also experience paranormal encounters in everyday life. Ingrid P. Dean is a retired detective sergeant, forensic artist, and 20-plus year police veteran in the Michigan State Police. Her book, Spirit of the Badge, began as a culminating project for her master's degree in transpersonal psychology and related studies. The project grew as more police officers began to share their extraordinary stories, resulting in an informative, delightful collection of exceptional, heartwarming experiences. Ingrid has a BA in art from Wayne State University. She's a professional artist, musician, and writer. She's also a state-licensed polygraph examiner and teaches the art of detecting truth and deception. In addition to Spirit of the Badge, 60 true police stories of divine guidance, miracles, and intuition, Ingrid is also the author of True Police Stories of the Strange and Unexplained. Ingrid, welcome to the Conspiracy Show. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Terrific. Thanks. I'm so delighted to have you here, and I'm really, truthfully enjoying, I say that to the polygraph examiner, truthfully enjoying Spirit of the Badge. How long did it take you to compile these stories? When did they first start coming to you?
You know, I started a culminating project for my master's degree in psychology, and that final project was about special stories by police officers of an exceptional nature. And so the whole focus was around exceptional human experiences. And then as the project developed, then I got all the chapters to a really good book. And one of the instructors at the college suggested that, this might be something the public would really like to hear, since you're showing the human nature of police officers as well as their, openness and receptiveness towards the paranormal.
The metaphysical side, the spiritual side of policing, and, yes, the paranormal side. Is this something that police officers talk about amongst themselves on a regular basis, or is it kind of hush-hush?
I think they're becoming more open as the years go by. I think that they're more open now, and we're starting to see television shows that are more of an intuitive, metaphysical, paranormal nature. But when I first did this project, which would have been in the late 2000s, it was more hush-hush. You know, it's an area that police would only talk amongst themselves with selective friends and partners. I think now that they're becoming more open about it, and we're finding more publicized stories and encounters. So it's getting better, the openness.
Those of us that are not police officers, we have our preconceived notions about what police work is like, and you write about something in your introduction called the CSI effect. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I think because of a number of the reality shows on television that the public gets a kind of a misconception on what we're really capable of obtaining in terms of evidence, to the point that, you know, they expect us to find fingerprints on corduroy hats, you know, and that's impossible. So these reality shows almost give the illusion that we can do anything when we can't. You know, we have rules and protocol to follow, and there's certain evidence that we're able to collect and other evidence that we can't. So that the CSI effect is about shows that people watch, and they get that misperception that we're capable of doing more than we can.
Right, and the other misconception is that it's all about using technology and science, and little room for things like intuition or trusting one's gut. Now, when you come out of a police school, a police college, I mean, you're told about, you know, the tools of the trade and proper police procedure and protocol and how to investigate and maintain a crime scene and so forth. But do they ever talk to you about things like intuition or trusting your gut?
They talk about trusting your gut. And, you know, it's kind of a more grounded way of saying, you know, intuition, thoughts that pass through, you know, your mind. If you think something's dangerous or a threat, it probably is. You know, if the hair is standing on the back of your neck, there's a problem. So I do remember, 1989, I went through recruit school, and they said, pay attention to your gut instinct. And I did. And I think there were several occasions in my career where that helped me immensely. You know, nothing to really explain why I was being threatened or why I felt fear at a certain traffic stop or in a certain house. But that gut feeling, when that happened, I paid attention. And so do a lot of other police officers out there.
I want to go back to the early 90s, and I think this is your story. This happened to you, if I'm not mistaken. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were working the 12th precinct in Detroit, correct?
No,
it wasn't
a different officer.
Oh, that wasn't you.
I think that's a story called An Angel's Shield.
That's right. Yes.
Yes, that's a Detroit police officer that shared an experience that he had that he considered like an angel encounter or divine intervention.
Right. This is a rather harrowing tale that could have ended tragically for the police officer. Just walk us through. Tell us what happened.
Well, he was on patrol. He was with a new officer that was his partner in the right seat. There was a car that went through a red light, and he decided to pursue it when a civilian kind of looked at him and said, you know, aren't you going to stop that car that went through the red light? So he decides to pursue it, stops the car, and then there are four hoodlum-like people in the car. And as soon as he stops it, the driver of the vehicle jumps out of the car and starts shooting at him with an AK-40 automatic weapon. And the rest of the story is about what he sees and perceives as those bullets are hitting his windshield. And this is what he believes to be an angel encounter, because he sees light and all of these bullets going through the windshield. And I believe he opens his door and steps out to be in a better position. And he never gets hurt. Somehow he escapes all those bullets and survives.
Right. Those bullets should have gone right through the windshield, and I think he writes they should have hit him in the mouth.
Absolutely. I mean, it was like an AK-40 automatic weapon. So there were a lot of bullets flying.
And they just seemed to deflect off the windshield and bounce straight up.
Exactly.
And he got out of the squad car and he looked in, and the squad car seemed to fill with this ball of brilliant light.
Yes. Yes, and it was like all in slow motion when he described it to me as well, which is not uncommon when you're in a really traumatic situation where you've only got seconds to respond. You know, the way your perception works, it seems like everything slows down. So he was adamant that there was a huge light that was surrounding the car, and he felt protected.
Now, I'm wondering how a police officer in that situation files a report. Does he put everything in that report? How does he do that? How did that police officer end up telling that story to his superiors?
My understanding is he was selective in who he told about the metaphysical quality of it. He didn't talk about the light, in the official report. He just simply stated, the facts of what happened, how he stopped the car, the bullets were flying, and that nobody was injured. But he knew what happened and what his perception of is what he thought was divine intervention. And of course, here, we don't mix religion with, police work or, belief systems, with the facts when we're writing a report.
And what about his partner? What did he witness?
I think it was a she, and I think that she saw part of it, and that she eventually went for cover other than the vehicle. So she actually ran from the vehicle. So he shares a little bit of that as well in the story.
And how did that end up changing that particular police officer? Did it change the way that he policed? Did it change the way that he dealt with the public that he was sworn to protect and serve?
He told me that he felt so protected spiritually that he trusted trusted God. Trusted his spiritual side for the rest of his career. So it did have an effect on him because he survived something that he didn't believe he should have. So it changed his spiritual outlook on life. That's what he said.
There's a story in the book about a police officer that is stationed in, I believe it's Skagway, Alaska.
Yes.
Just tell us what happened to this.
Spirits of the North.
Yes.
Yes, and the officer was from Skagway, and he shares his encounters with ghosts at the Skagway Police Department and all of the strange sounds and noises and tricks that the ghosts were playing on him on the night shift. So there's a little bit of humor in that story as well as his perspective, of what happened. And he was a relatively new officer to the police department at that time, and unbeknownst to him, most all of the police officers knew about the ghosts, but didn't tell him about it. So it's a great story because there's some humor in it too.
And what was the experience? What happened to this officer at the police station at night?
Oh, there were doors shutting each time he would, hear sounds, and nobody was there. And there were steps that he could hear, I believe, walking above him. And there was nobody else in the station except for him. But, he still was guarded, and he would go check these sounds, and of course nothing was there. So it's fun to read.
And I understand at one point, he admitted he was so fearful because this door, which he tested, he would close it, it would latch properly, and it wouldn't open, and then it would fly open. And he actually went out into the hallway with his gun drawn.
Yes, and yes. Yeah, he did. And I think it took him time to get used to those sounds and come to the understanding that they weren't going to go away. And they did not. Apparently, this particular police station is haunted, and they're still there, from what I'm told. So whenever new officers come on board, he says that they don't tell the new officer about what goes on there, and they learn for themselves. I believe they even brought somebody in to try to get rid of the ghosts, but it didn't work.
To exorcise the police station?
Yes.
Are they fearful, not fearful, but somewhat maybe embarrassed not embarrassed, that's not the right word either, but apprehensive that these stories might get out into the public? Because, again, we think of police officers as being very stoic, being, no nonsense, just the facts and so forth. And then all of a sudden we're seeing this other side, thanks to you.
Well, and it's a good question, because I do think that, police officers work really hard. They serve the public. They have to testify in court, write accurate reports. So they don't want to look like quacks. So they're not going to tell anybody the kinds of experiences that they have if they're, of a metaphysical nature. They're careful, selective of who they talk to, and make sure that person is open, to, those sorts of exceptional human experiences, because they have dignity. We work very hard, and we want to be respected, and we want to be of service. So sometimes if you tell people these sorts of stories who are not open to the metaphysical or the paranormal, then it backfires. None of us want to look bad. We always want to look our best and be our best.
And when you started soliciting these stories, how did you do that? And was it difficult to pry these stories out of your fellow men and women in blue?
Maybe at first it was a little bit difficult, but after I explained why I was collecting the stories and how I was going to honor those stories and write them up and allow them to read those stories before they're published, to make sure they're in their exact words, they were okay with it. In fact, the first book is called Spirit of the Badge, and that's the independently published book. And then a couple years later, a publisher picked up the book and they republished it, and they called it True Stories of the Strange and Unexplained. And we changed about 30% of the stories in that book, but it's primarily the same. And all of the officers were willing to give their names and the police departments that they worked for. So they were sticking to their story because they knew it happened and that it was the truth. So the first book, Spirit of the Badge, I put all of the officers' names in the front of the book to keep them relatively anonymous, because it was protective. I was also a police officer and hesitant in the beginning to put my name with my stories.
Right.
Because I didn't want to look like a quack either.
Right. So the names are listed first, so we don't know which story to attach to which police officer, correct? Exactly.
But then, again, once that was picked up by a publisher and republished, the publisher wanted the names of the officers and their police departments with the story. And I was so surprised but happy that maybe only one or two officers declined to do that.
Ingrid,
all of the others said, sure, put my name with the story because it happened.
Terrific. Ingrid, we're going to take a quick time out. Spirit of the Badge, 60 true police stories of divine guidance, miracles, and intuition, right here in The Conspiracy Show. Back with more. Don't go away.
When in doubt, blame the government. You're listening to The Conspiracy Show with Richard Serrett.
And welcome back. And just a quick programming note. Next week on the program, Rosemary Ellen Guiley will make her regular monthly visit, and Rosemary has edited and compiled a brand new book entitled Fate Presents Planet Bigfoot. So we'll talk Bigfoot. That's in the second hour. In the first hour next week, Los Angeles psychic to the stars, Sloan Bella, will be back. Always an interesting conversation when Sloan joins us, and she'll talk about, among other things, certain satanic societies within Hollywood where she works. That's next week on The Conspiracy Show. We are here with Ingrid Dean, author of Spirit of the Badge, 60 True Police Stories of Divine Guidance, Miracles, and Intuition. And I wanted to talk to you about I'm not sure where in the United States the Bowers Harbor Inn is, but it apparently had quite a reputation as being a haunted restaurant. First of all, where is the Bowers Harbor Inn?
It's in Traverse City, Michigan.
Ah, okay.
This story was provided by a young officer who was responding to a burglar alarm call at the restaurant and didn't know about the fact that it was haunted. And as I recall, she goes inside to do the normal inspections to make sure that nobody's in there, so her gun is drawn. And as I recall, the ghost of the restaurant makes all sorts of strange sounds and noises and plays tricks on the officer, but eventually even locks her inside a room at the inn when she's the only one in there and her partner is on the outside of the building. She eventually gets out, but that's what the story's about, and she talks about her experience going to this alarm call.
And, of course, it's a midnight shift. It sounds like a cliche, and this happened to be kind of a dark and stormy night to boot, but is that when a lot of the paranormal stuff happens, on the midnight shift, or can it happen at any time of day?
Any time of day. I think they become naturally a little bit more spooky when it's at nighttime and you don't have light helping you to see, but the incidents can happen any time of day.
And how about for you? I mean, we haven't talked about you and your experiences. I don't know if any of these are yours in the book because, the copy that I have, all the officers involved are mentioned up front. They're not attached to any particular story.
Right. One of my stories is called Karmic Happenings. I remember to this day about stopping a vehicle with a burned-out taillight, and the driver jumps out of the car and he's saying, don't arrest me, don't arrest me. I have a warrant for being suspended, but I have a date tonight, a date with a woman. It's my first date in years, and I just know that this woman is the one, like the one he's going to marry. I just remember him shaking, and he said, if we don't go out tonight, she'll never date me again. If you take me to jail, the life that I wish for will never happen, blah, blah, blah. And, as officers, we hear, a lot of stories. And in this case, I'm thinking, well, he's either being really truthful because of his disposition and his behavior, or he is like one fabulous liar, and I should just let him go just because of his excellent Hollywood acting. But long story short, I do sense that he's telling the truth, and I simply let him go. I still give him a ticket for the suspended license, of which I have that authority and option, and I tell him to leave the car on the side of the road and just get a taxi. And, of course, he was more than willing. 2 years later, on an unrelated traffic stop in a completely different town that's hundreds of miles away, I stop a possible drunk driver. I am by myself with no backup, and the driver resists arrest because he is obviously drunk, and we get into a fight, and we start rolling around in the Michigan snow, and at 5'2", 128 pounds, I'm losing the fight.
Oh, dear.
So then this big semi-truck stops behind my patrol car, and the truck driver hops out of the truck and assists me. So I'm able to cuff the person and place him in the back of the patrol car with the truck driver's help. And then the truck driver kind of turns to me and he says, you know, you don't remember me, do you? I didn't remember him at first until he explained, but come to find out he's the man that I had stopped 2 years ago who had a date, you know, and I had let him go. And he was so happy, and he said, you know, I really actually married that woman, and I got my driver's license back, and I went to truck driving school. So it was just a nice heart-centered story, and it's of kind of a synchronistic nature in which, you know, what are the odds, you know, of that same person from a traffic stop 2 years prior seeing me rolling in the snow with somebody so far away from where he was stopped, you know, different part of the state.
The cosmic court is now in session. The cosmic tumblers. Unbelievable.
Yeah. I'll remember that forever.
Do you believe in coincidences?
Well, yes, but no. I feel like there are meaningful coincidences, you know, as Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, so amply put, that we have meaningful coincidences that occur with no causal type relationship, yet later on we can find them all to be very meaningful. And that's what the definition of synchronicity is. They're meaningful coincidences.
Right. Now, after that altercation, or that episode, did you find yourself maybe using more discretion when it came to, let's say, traffic stops and listening to people's stories and then maybe giving them the benefit of the doubt?
Well, it's interesting. I think that the public has this kind of misconception that everything is very black and white, and that the decisions that we make as police officers, you know, are rules cut in stone, and that's simply not true. We actually do have discretion, and we can make judgment calls in certain situations. And in answer to your question, I think it was a realization that I really do have the authority to discern and make decisions and not be so black and white about my decisions. So, yes, I think that because I was a younger officer at that time and realized that that decision was a good decision, I became more confident to use my judgment as well as, practicing the laws and making sure that people are following the rules.
As you were telling that story, and because I've read the story, I knew where it was headed, but even still, hearing you say it, that telltale shiver went up my spine, which can sometimes be, caused by sort of a scary or a frightening episode, but in this case, as you say, it's a very heart-centered, uplifting story, but I still got that tingle. Is that part of intuition? Do you get a tingle up your spine, or is there a sort of a physical response that's associated with trusting your gut or intuition?
That's a great question, because, intuition can be defined in so many ways, and for me, it's not necessarily a physical feeling to go with it. It's the way my thoughts travel through my mind, and when there is a thought that comes through that doesn't seem to fit with anything else, I look at it. It catches my attention when I suddenly, think of something that doesn't seem to fit in the picture, and I listen, and I respond or I don't respond to it. So that's how intuition works for me. It's almost like being the watcher and watching your thoughts and feelings traveling through your consciousness and paying attention to the ones that are different.
Now, you're a forensic artist. or you were a
Yes.
forensic artist. There's a fascinating story in here about a forensic artist, and this person had trained at the in facial reconstruction at the FBI Academy in Quantico. Did you study at Quantico as well, or?
Yes, I studied at the FBI Academy, and then also in Chicago at Northwestern University.
So this particular forensic artist had quite an interesting story. It deals with being presented with a box that contained a human skull that was pulled from a river. Talk to me about that story.
Yes, this story originated from a Michigan State Police trooper, and she has a skull that has been sitting on the shelf for quite some time, and decides to do a facial reconstruction, which has to do with using clay and tissue depth markers in order to develop a face to identify the skull. The story that's shared by this officer, it talks about an unsolved case. And yes, the skull was dredged out of the Clinton River, which is near Mount Clemens, Michigan. And she shares about how she ended up solving this case that was regarding a missing young man.
Ingrid, I'm going to jump in here. Pardon the interruption. Sure. We'll step away just for a short time out to take care of some business and come back and continue to talk about the skull in the river. Ingrid Dean, author of Spirit of the Badge, 60 True Police Stories of Divine Guidance, Miracles, and Intuition, will also take your calls at the top of the hour. Questions, comments, perhaps you can share a story or two if you're a member of the police force, the local constabulary, as they say, the authorities. We'll take a quick time out. Back with more of The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Serrett. Stay with us.
From Yeti to Nessie, pyramids to pandemics, all is revealed on The Conspiracy Show with Richard Serrett.
Hey, welcome back. Ingrid Dean, retired police detective, is with us, 20-plus years on the force. Spirit of the Badge, 60 True Police Stories of Divine Guidance, Miracles, and Intuition. We were talking about this forensic artist presented with the skull that was dredged out of the Clinton River in Michigan back in, I guess, 1992. And it was this trooper's job, or forensic artist's job, to reconstruct, I guess, this face, or to at least, try and determine the identity, because there was no other body parts. There wasn't even, I think it was even missing its lower jaw. This was all they had to work with, was this skull. And you talk about how the case was solved through a young girl.
Yes, and the face that she develops on the skull is of a young man. And when the officer shares the story, she shares it both scientifically, and how she also used her intuition with reference to the facial reconstruction. And you're right, it was a lone cranium without the jaws. So it was like half a skull that she had to work with. But the upper teeth were still there. And so what she ends up doing, she does the reconstruction as best she can without a lower jaw, and then she takes the initiative to look back at various cases where people were missing. And she finds one that she feels really fits what this person looks like. It's not exact, but it's possible, and she sees the teeth in the photograph of the missing person, and she thought, I can work with this. And so eventually she takes the skull to a dentist, and eventually is able to solve the case with the dentist's help.
But again, had to take a leap of faith and rely on intuition.
Yes, and there's certain aspects when we do facial reconstructions that are intuitive. The smoothness of the skin. We have to kind of base that on the lifestyle of that person, what we think the lips look like, because there's certain parts that are never going to be exact in a facial reconstruction. And I know with this officer, she was very good at her work, and she had several wonderful cases like this where she used her intuition and was able to find that person based on the skull reconstruction that she made.
Now, I've interviewed countless psychics and intuitives and mediums and remote viewers and so forth over the years on this program. And many of them say that they have worked with police departments, but it's always sort of on the lowdown, because police departments, they say, they don't want it to get out that they're working with a psychic to find a missing person or to solve a murder, but they sometimes will go to them as a last resort because, all the leads have dried up and the case has gone cold. Right. But it seems like, after reading this book and listening to you, there would be kind of a more willingness to work with psychics, given that many police officers are using their own intuition. Talk to me about, their willingness to work with psychics. Does it happen more than we think?
I think it does. I think there are more officers open to that than the public thinks. And that you're absolutely right. When a case goes cold and there is absolutely nothing else to work with, why not work with a psychic? It could give you some ideas, stir your thinking about the case. Even if they're inaccurate, it can't hurt, to try. So I know that in my department, we've utilized psychics. We just kind of keep it under our hat. We don't, advertise it, when we seek that kind of help. But I've always believed that it's useful. It can't hurt. And then we've come up with situations where cases got solved, using the ideas and visions of a good psychic.
Now, it came out maybe a decade or more ago that the U.S. Defense Department was trying to train psychic spies. They had a remote viewing program. And I'm wondering if any police officers maybe take it upon themselves to try and train as remote viewers. Do you know of any?
I don't know, but I heard of that. I read about that pertaining to, the federal government utilizing remote viewers. But I don't know of any officers who ever volunteered or were sought out. But I know they had a number of remote viewers, and I wouldn't be surprised, if some of them were police officers.
We're going to take another time out. This was a short segment. When we come back, I want to talk about a fascinating case that involved the tragic deaths of some snowmobilers that went under the ice. It's called the Bone Lady, and Ingrid Dean will share that with us next on the other side when the Conspiracy Show continues.
Keeping an eye on the New World Order. This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Serrett.
And we will get to phone calls after the top of the hour, but I would love to hear from police officers talking about how perhaps you used intuition in your job, or perhaps an experience with a remarkable synchronicity, or maybe an encounter with the paranormal. And we don't need to use real names. You can remain anonymous if you'd like, but we'll do that again after the top of the hour. Ingrid Dean stays with us for the full 2 hours tonight. author of Spirit of the Badge, 60 True Police Stories of Divine Guidance, Miracles, and Intuition. Before we proceed with this remarkable story called The Bone Lady, just tell us how we can get a copy of the book.
Certainly. Please go to my website. It's called Spirit of the Badge, all one word, .com, and it has my email address and a post office box address to order the book. And the cost is normally $10 per book, but plus shipping and handling. But if listeners mention that they heard tonight's show, I will gladly give a discount and charge $7 for the book plus shipping and handling. So I wanted to add, too, that if there are any police officers out there or first responders who are listening, if you're willing to share a story with me of an exceptional human experience that you experienced on duty, I will provide a free book in return for your story. And if it's, if it's published, I'll give you that book.
Terrific. All right. Well, maybe we can help you start Volume 2 of Spirit of the Badge right here in the program. Thank you for that generous offer for my listeners.
Oh,
and can they get an autographed copy as well?
Sure. If they ask me when they order, I'd be happy to do that.
Terrific. All right. So we have this case of a snowmobile with two riders going through the ice, and they bring in the cadaver dog, I guess. I think that's what they're called anyway. They sniff for dead bodies. And just a quick aside, I was out in Death Valley a couple of years ago. I was filming an episode of Mysteries of the National Parks, and I met someone when he had a three-legged cadaver dog. And he was actually working on the Manson case, because there are still, I think, bodies that Charlie Manson himself had murdered and disposed of in the desert, and they're still looking for these bodies, even though Manson has now died. But what he told me about this this cadaver-sniffing dog, remarkable, their sense of smell. I mean, the body could be fully decomposed, but just a few molecules in the soil, like 6 feet down, is enough for the dog. I had no idea that they were able to do this. Okay.
It's amazing. I saw a documentary myself about a dog that was trained to sniff for cancer cells. That's how sensitive dogs are and how good their smell is. And in the documentary, they did an experiment with 5 people laying, on the floor, and they knew who had cancer and who did not, and the dog picked them out right away. That's how sensitive they are.
They are absolutely remarkable.
It's amazing.
Remarkable creatures. So the Bone Lady is Sandra, and she has the dog.
Yeah, and this story is a rather unfortunate one, because it is told by a detective about this famous woman who is known to find bones and bodies in the water with her cadaver dog. And you mentioned the 2 snowmobiles going through the water. It's just a short example of one situation in which the officer uses her, and she's wrong, where she says, no, the snowmobilers didn't go down here. I can see by the way the dog's acting, and there's no bodies here. Well, a week later, bodies show up at the shoreline. So she was clearly wrong. And that's the first red flag that the detective sees, that, like, something's just not right. And it's a kind of a gut instinct or an intuitive feeling at that point. So he goes on to share of another time when his department utilizes this woman again with her dogs in order to try and locate a woman's body who's been missing since 1980. And through various signs, signals, and, eventually incredible intuition or divine intervention, the detective figures out that the woman is actually planting bones at the crime scene, and she obtained these bones from a university medical department. So she gets caught in the act, as they're out on a crime scene. And it's just very unfortunate when these things happen. It doesn't give a good reputation for other people who use those dogs ethically and wisely.
Why did Sandra do that? She was getting paid, I guess. That's the idea?
Well, I thought from a psychological perspective that she felt under a lot of pressure to be successful and please the officers. That was the feeling that I got. Yes, she got paid, but I thought that she may have had some therapy issues that needed to be addressed in order to go to that length, to please investigators. And very unfortunate.
And the claim that dogs can smell dead bodies even underwater, is that true?
I've heard that it is, but if the body is 40 feet or 50 feet underwater, I can't believe that it would be possible. I'm no expert, but I have heard of cases where it's relatively shallow water, and the dog can smell something. So I do believe, it's possible, but we have to use common sense in addition to, good police work in order to solve cases.
Right.
Utilizing dogs.
And the other thing, I wasn't aware that they sort of contracted out that job, that they went to somebody who had a cadaver dog. I thought it would be all sort of in-house, that it would be a police officer or a dog that was a special, a dog from the canine unit that was trained as a cadaver dog.
Right, and I think with this, every department is different and has different ways of utilizing experts. I know that in my agency with the Michigan State Police, we have our own cadaver dogs. But other smaller departments can't afford necessarily to have a dog trained or a trainer, and so they use outside sources. And in this case, it happened to be a woman that was actually known to be really good at her work. But for whatever reason, she just made that decision and that judgment error to plant bones.
All right, Ingrid, we are going to break top of the hour here, and on the other side, we'll open up the phone lines and take questions and comments. Hopefully we'll hear from some first responders, police officers, with some stories to share, miracles, divine guidance, the paranormal. Stay with us right here on The Conspiracy Show. Well, thanks for inviting me into your home. Long-haul truck, RV, camper, taxi, your parents' well-appointed rec room with the simulated wood paneling and the shag carpeting, your loft, that greasy spoon just off the interstate, and your cabin in the woods. Hi all to those of you who are tuning us in on one of our affiliate stations across North America, and my thanks to Chris Whitting and everyone at Syndication Networks for their continued hard work and support. Hey you, streaming us live on zoomerradio.ca, and those of you checking us out on our YouTube live stream. The YouTube channel is Strange Planet. Please check it out and hit that red sub button. And those of you in the live YouTube chat who join us every week, however and wherever you're listening, I bid thee the warmest of welcomes, and I thank you for your fine company. Retired Police Detective Ingrid P. Dean, this hour as we continue to discuss the metaphysical and spiritual elements of police work, and she's sharing just some of the 60 true police stories of divine guidance, miracles, and intuition from her book, Spirit of the Badge. And let me give you the phone numbers, because you'll find those are kind of handy when you're calling into a radio program. If you're in the Greater Toronto Area, and again, I'd love to hear from all of you, but in particular, police officers, first responders, 416-360-0740, 416-360-0740. That's in the Greater Toronto Area. And toll free from just about anywhere, 1-866-740-4840. 1-866-740. 1-866-740-4740. And Ingrid, once again, how do we get a copy of Spirit of the Badge?
Please visit my website at spiritofthebadge.com, and it has my email address and post office box address in order to order the book Spirit of the Badge.
There's a great story in here about a psychic janitor. Tell us about that.
That is a great story, and it was provided to me by a police polygraph examiner who helped solve an investigation through the psychic eye of a state police post janitor. And in this case, the suspect who was being polygraphed was an individual who was suspect in being involved in the disappearance and probable homicide of a lady. And what's so interesting about this story is the strange synchronistic set of circumstances surrounding the case that involves another detective who happened to be watching the polygraph and gained information through the pretest interview about the case that he didn't know about. And it matched several tidbits of information he had received from a psychic janitor way prior to the polygraph, such as the subject's true name and where the body could be buried. So it's a great story, and it kind of goes step by step of what makes the incident so synchronistic.
So, and how did this janitor, how was he involved in the case? Or was he just someone who some information came to him or her and they related it to the police?
I believe it was a male janitor, and he volunteered the information. He saw one of the troopers who had first worked on the case about a missing woman, and he gave him information like what the suspect's first name was, which was Raul, R-A-U-L. And the polygraph examiner was able to figure out that the person he was polygraphing had a different name, and the suspect gave his real name to the polygraph examiner, which was Raul, the exact name the janitor had given a few months ago to one of the investigating troopers. So I thought that was very interesting, unusual, and I don't necessarily believe in coincidences, but this helped. This information helped.
And what are police officers told, either in police college or elsewhere or afterwards, perhaps by their superiors, etc., about how to deal with tips from people let's say on the phone, who claim they're psychics? I mean, do they judiciously take this information down, or do they tend to be dismissive? Or, I mean, how are you told to deal with tips from people who claim to be psychic?
In my police academy, they said to go ahead and write down that information. You never know. They said nothing. It doesn't hurt to go ahead and take down that information, because it can be useful later. If you can't solve a case and this is your last resort, you'll have that extra information to look at. Now, some officers are more open to doing that and taking down the information, while other officers would rather try to, use just case facts. It just really depends on how open that investigator is, to receiving information from a psychic. Every department's different. In my department, they were open about it. Michigan State Police. They said go ahead and write that down if you get a tip from a psychic.
Interesting. Let's say hi to Brian in Toronto. Brian, good evening, good morning, and welcome to the Conspiracy Show. How are you?
Hello?
Hi there. Is that Brian?
No, it's Melanie. How are you?
Oh, okay. Melanie, we'll take your call first.
Thank you so much. Wonderful program as usual. Ingrid, I was wondering, have you ever, or have any police officers ever sensed maybe a police officer that you work with or you know of or you run into who may have a bit of a sociopathic personality. Does your intuition help you in that, or do you go by other ways or means of detecting someone who's on the police force that may not be upfront?
Whoops, we lost Melanie.
Well, I can still answer her question. We're very sensitive to the partners who we work with and our fellow coworkers. And while, whether you call it intuition or gut instinct, if there is something that doesn't feel right, about a coworker, I think officers are very in tune to that because we protect each other's back. So, if a situation arose where, an officer had a gut feeling that there was something, mentally wrong, with a fellow coworker or partner, I'm sure that they would mention something to supervision.
Mm-hmm. Would they be intimidated or afraid for their own safety to do something if they knew the officer wasn't right or was actually involved in something criminal or committed a criminal act or a lie? Would a police officer be intimidated and afraid of another police officer to do anything about it?
I don't think so. Mm-hmm. At least not in my experience. Mm-hmm. And I was in the Michigan State Police for 22 plus years, and whenever we had a problem or a challenge or something didn't feel right with a fellow coworker, we didn't hesitate to say something to supervision. Mm-hmm. Because we're protecting each other and we're protecting the public.
That's true.
So I never experienced an officer ever being intimidated or afraid to talk about another fellow officer. Mm-hmm. If there were really problems or something going on that they sensed, they would say something.
Melanie, thank you for the call.
Thank you for your godly work.
Thank you,
oh,
indeed.
You're welcome.
It is the Lord's work. Just further to that point, I would think, that when you have, every organization, they have their, they have a bad apple.
Absolutely.
And because it only takes one to sort of impugn the reputation of the entire force, that as soon as that person is sussed out, everyone would sort of circle the wagons and make sure that person is being, dealt with properly.
Exactly. We have a reputation to uphold, and our integrity means everything. So, in my experience, I never sensed an officer ever being, afraid to talk about something that, could end up being a bad or threatening situation. They would go to supervision, and usually every agency has a certain protocol for that, rules to follow.
All right, now we'll welcome Brian in Toronto. Brian?
Hi, Richard.
Hi.
Yeah, I was a federal officer for over 25 years, and I was suspended from duty, and I went to a mall, and I heard a lot of commotion, and it turned out that a person stole some socks, and he stabbed the owner, and the owner was trying to chase him, and I ran after him, ran down a block, and we got in a struggle. And I arrested him, but I didn't have any handcuffs or anything because I was suspended.
Right.
And we got in a fight in the loading dock when I took him back into the mall with the security guard. And then his hands disappeared. I didn't know where they went, so I threw him with a judo throw. I landed on top of him. I twisted his neck, and I twisted it in a certain way that I could break it. And I just looked at him, and I said, "If you struggle with me, I'm going to break your neck." And I just said it in my mind. I didn't say it verbally. Both his eyes widened so you could see the white in the top and the bottom of his eye, and he stopped struggling. And then we found out that he had the knife still in his pocket. It was on his hand. And they had 7 types of different DNA on that knife that he used before. And he also killed a security guard mall the week before with the same knife.
Wow, you had a serial killer in your grasp, and you could have been the next victim.
That's right. That's right. I just had that feeling. I don't know what I had him in the arm lock, and then he struggled, and his hands disappeared. And I said, there's something bad going on. I have to do something. And I just put my arm around his neck, and I threw him with a hip toss. I landed on him, and then I squashed him, and I pulled up the neck, and I twisted it.
Right.
So, yeah, it was just a weird feeling, like I was inside of his head, and he was inside my head, but no words.
Well,
telepathy.
Yes, telepathy. Yeah. Great story, Brian. Thank you for sharing that.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah, bravo for that.
Thanks. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Nonverbal communication.
I say bravo in the sense that people off duty, they don't have to necessarily respond to situations like that. But when I hear stories like that, and officers are off duty, like at a bank that's being robbed, and they do heroic acts like that, even though they don't have to, they're my heroes. So, yeah.
Is there anything about police work in the sense that the adrenaline is going? I mean, when they're in the thick of it, apprehending somebody, or they're being fired upon, or they're in a stand-down type situation, is there anything there, do you think, that maybe contributes to psychic ability or intuition?
I think that because as officers that we are subjected to such intense moments like that it almost makes us a little bit hypersensitive, or more sensitive than a normal person. And I do think that it develops in time because of the nature of our work. We become more and more intuitively sensitive with that gut instinct. So that's a great question. I think that officers are way more sensitive than people think they are. The stereotypical image is that, they're rough around the edges and are not sensitive to anything, and they're black and white, and it's simply not true. And that was one of the reasons that I put this project together and compiled this book, is because I want the public to see that we don't necessarily fit that stereotypical image that the media projects us to be.
416-360-0740 in the Greater Toronto Area, 416-360-0740, and toll free from just about anywhere, 1-866-740-4740, 1-866-740-4740. We're here with Ingrid Dean, retired police detective, over 20 years experience with Michigan Police, and her book, Spirit of the Badge, 60 True Police Stories of Divine Guidance, Miracles, and Intuition. Would love to hear from first responders and police officers who have perhaps had a paranormal experience on the job, or an instance of remarkable synchronicity. Brian was telling us about his encounter with a serial killer, and Brian could have ended up, the victim in that case. The Grim Reaper comes to mind, and there's a story about the Grim Reaper in the book that involves a rookie. Tell us about the Grim Reaper.
The Grim Reaper is a heartfelt story, and it's told by a city police officer, and regarding a young boy named Johnny, who he ended up talking with after an accident just occurred. The boy was in a wreck, and he was dying, and at the same time, people were throwing rocks at the officer who was trying to save the boy's life, and shouting out outlandish type profanities like, you killed him, you did it, you chased him, and that's what caused his death. It was a public that was jumping to conclusions and throwing rocks at him. And the boy eventually dies at the scene, but later that night the officer has a dream in which the Grim Reaper appears and gives him a special message. So it's also a story about the messages we receive in dreams.
Can you share that message with us?
I don't know the specific words the Grim Reaper said to him, but it was the fact that, you know, it was the boy's time to go, and that, you know, officers like you think that you can, you know, save everybody, but, you know, indeed, sometimes you can't, and it's just time for that person to go. And that was essentially what the Grim Reaper was saying.
I would imagine that police officers and first responders in general have quite an active dream life, because obviously after a day on the job that's filled often with violence and death, or, you know, it can be uplifting, but it often is, you know, they see the worst and the best in people. How about for you? I mean, did you find that you must have had just some wild dreams throughout your career as a police officer?
I am a very active dreamer, absolutely. I don't know if all officers are like that, but my dreams are often very adventurous and colorful, and it brings to mind a story in the book that I contributed that is called The Clairvoyant Dream. And it was on the morning of 9/11, and I was sleeping, and the dream was very clear and short. The dream was that I was some type of a leader with a group of people who were like rebellions or rebellers, and there were bombs going off, and I was leading the group to a building where I thought that we could hide. And when we went into the building got bombed, and it was all fiery and smoky, and we were all crawling on the floor in order to breathe. And what made the dream so kind of traumatizing is that it was the first time that I felt like death was inevitable in the dream. I couldn't go up, and we couldn't go down the stairs. And so that morning, I am jogging around the track with my sister just before work, and I tell her all about the dream, and I said, "What do you think it could mean?" And she said, "Boy, I don't know. Maybe it could be like a former lifetime or something like that." And then I kind of let it go, and I went to work, and I think it was between 8 and 8:20 when the first plane went through the first Twin Tower. And my partner came running in and said, "Ingrid," he said, a plane just went into a Twin Tower. And then he ran off again. And I thought to myself, it was probably just a private pilot, had navigational problems and accidentally, hit a building in New York. And I didn't think anything of it. And then my partner ran back in again and said, "Ingrid," he said, "a second plane, a jetliner, a second one went into the other building." And I thought, oh my gosh, the dream that I had earlier had a lot of symbolism in it that was consistent with what just happened. And so I ran to the conference room where everybody was seated and watching the Twin Towers burning, and I knew what was going to happen, and that was that the buildings were going to come down. And that was because that was the end of my dream, that's why I felt death was inevitable in the dream, is because the building toppled on top of us, and I woke up.
My word.
So it's really strange, I don't know, why don't I have dreams of other terrible, traumatic things? Who knows? But in that particular situation, I think because so many police officers were killed in that might have been the connection that I had. So I felt like I had stepped into the future.
Remarkable story. Ingrid, stay with us. Spirit of the Badge. More true police stories on the other side. The Conspiracy Show. My name is Richard Serrett.
When you look at the sky, ever wonder if someone's looking back? This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Serrett.
Welcome back. Welcome back to Ingrid Dean, retired police detective and author of Spirit of the Badge, 60 True Police Stories of Divine Guidance, Miracles, and intuition. And, we've talked about symbols and signs and synchronicities. In fact, that's a whole sort of section in the book. And I wanted to talk about a story that really touched me. It's called A Trooper's Debt on Christmas Day. Can you share that with us, Ingrid?
I love that one. That is one of my favorite stories in the book.
Mine too.
And it is another story of synchronicity and amazing coincidences that take place with no causal relationship, but end up being extremely meaningful later. And the story starts out about how a man becomes a trooper, even though his mother wants him to be a minister, pastor, and his father wants him to be a surgeon. And as a young adolescent, in fact, the man receives a unique ring from his father that symbolizes what a surgeon might wear on his finger. So the man eventually follows his own dream, and he becomes a Washington state trooper despite his parents' preferences. And then the story kind of fast forwards 2 years into his career, and the trooper is dispatched to a vehicular accident where he ends up saving the lives of a husband and wife while their little boy is watching from the back seat of the vehicle, which is pretty mangled. The trooper stops the mother from bleeding to death and also saves his father. And so the little boy, who is 6 at the time, says a prayer to God to please help his parents live, and he also notices the unique ring that the trooper's wearing. Then the story fast forwards to 20 years later, when the trooper's much older but still on patrol, and he has just been told that his daughter and granddaughter were in a very bad accident, and it doesn't look like his granddaughter's going to make it, who he just, is the love of his life. And so the trooper, ends up sitting in the hospital waiting room just after being told this situation, when these two men start walking through the room and are talking, and one man suddenly stops talking in mid-sentence, and he says, it's him, the trooper sitting over there with the ring. And it ends up being that the little boy in the mangled vehicle from 20 years ago, who watched the trooper save his mother's life, was that man, and he's now a pastor of the largest Baptist church in Spokane, and he sits down next to the trooper and actually recites the same, heartfelt prayer for his daughter and granddaughter, while his younger brother, who he was walking with, is one of the best surgeons in Washington, and he goes immediately to operate on the trooper's granddaughter. So interestingly, the surgeon would have never been born if the trooper had not saved the pastor's mother in that accident when he was a little boy.
Right.
And the trooper's granddaughter lived. And so it's a heartwarming story of synchronicity, and you'll see more of those synchronicities when you read it.
Right. I want to dive right back into another story here. It's called Murder 101.
Yes. That's told by a detective, and it's a case that he solves about a man who gets shot 6 times, and the man is like a pillar of the community, and there are absolutely no leads in the investigation. So it almost looks like the perfect murder with very little evidence except for these 38 bullets that were used to kill the man. What I find so endearing about the story is that the detective believes his intuition comes from the Holy Ghost, and he shares how he listens for the Holy Ghost. And whatever you want to call intuition, whether it's a gut feeling, ESP, psychic phenomena, or the Holy Ghost, personally, I believe something extra does exist that we can all draw upon for advice in all aspects of our lives. So anyway, this detective solves this case with virtually no leads, but through his personal connection with spirit and the messages that he receives in his head. and he has unexplained urges that lead him to solve the case, which are all embedded in the story. It's a great detective story.
Since this book came out, and it's been out a few years, do you have now police officers and first responders now reaching out to you, even unsolicited, saying, because they want to unburden themselves with something that's happened to them?
I have a nice collection right now, but just not quite enough to do a second book. And yes, they do reach out through my website, spiritofthebadge.com. I need a few more stories, so if there, again, are listeners out there, whether you're a police officer, EMS, firefighter, I could use another 15 to 20 stories to complete another book.
Well,
it'd be great if you contacted me.
Well, hopefully those people that will reach you through the website. Give us that website again.
spiritofthebadge.com.
spiritofthebadge.com. All right. I want to talk to you about death. And, I mean, it's not necessarily a story in the book, but I'm wondering about maybe personal experiences. I mean, I've talked to a number of people that work in ERs, and they've been present, obviously, at a death. And I've had very strange experiences. I mean, we hear about near-death experiences from the perspective of the person who has died and sort of come back, but also people who witness deaths have near-death experiences.
Sure.
Have you ever had anything like that happen to you or someone, maybe a colleague?
I've had a near-death experience, which is not in the book Spirit of the Badge. It's in the other book of True Police Stories of the Strange and Unexplained, which listeners can still buy from Amazon, but in the used section, because the publisher is no longer printing the book. But you can still purchase it as a used book. And it's the last story in the book, and it's about a situation in which I get involved in a chase with a truck. There's 3 people in the truck that look pretty young, but they're going over 100 miles an hour. And I get a radio call that the truck is about to go through my area. And so I pull ahead of the truck, and there's another patrol car behind the truck chasing it, and our intention is to box in the vehicle and gradually slow it down so that nobody gets hurt. And unfortunately, I got rammed. The vehicle totally disregarded our intentions and rammed me in the right rear bumper, and we were going over 100. I was trying to slow that truck down, but they didn't care. And so I got rammed, and the patrol car spun around several times and then flew off the roadway and landed upside down between 2 trees. Mm. What's interesting is what I went through in just a few seconds. I call it a near-death experience. Even though I didn't get hurt and I walked out with just a few scratches, I still experienced what people sometimes call the Akashic records.
Yes.
Where all of a sudden your whole life and maybe before your life, other lives start going through your mind. There were so many things that happened in just a few seconds because I really thought that I was going to probably die because I was going so fast, trying to slow down that vehicle. So the story is the last story in the published version of Spirit of the Badge.
And what information did you access from the Akashic record?
I thought I saw prior lifetimes that were of no real significance. I wasn't anybody famous or, Queen Elizabeth, none of that. But one took place in Scotland, and I could hear bagpipes. And another one was just like a common type factory worker, like in the 20s or 30s. And it was, the images were interesting because they weren't part of this life. So I kind of assumed later that they could have been the beginnings of what people call the Akashic Record.
And imagine all of that in just a fleeting moment.
Yes.
As the car is careening out of control. We'll take another quick time out, come back, and discuss further. True police stories of divine guidance, miracles, and intuition, and again, your phone calls.
The truth is not out there. It's right here. The Conspiracy Show with Richard Sarrett.
And this has been an eye-opening introduction to the human side of law enforcement. Retired police detective Ingrid P. Dean has been with us for the entire program, and her book, Spirit of the Badge, 60 True Police Stories of Divine Guidance, Miracles, and Intuition. And there's a story again, this is in the section called Lessons of the Heart. It's My Day in Court, and this involves someone who wanted to commit suicide by police officers, which is really it's a horrible thing, not only to imagine someone wanting to take their own life, but wanting to do it at the hands of police officers, to lay that on a police officer, practically daring them, begging them to shoot them. Tell us about this story involving this Allen individual.
It's definitely a heart story, and two police officers go to a safety welfare check on a man who placed a suicide-like voicemail on an answering machine. The officers find him, but he does have a gun, and he's threatening to shoot himself in the mouth if they don't get out of his house. Then the man staggers towards the officers and starts yelling in a very slurred voice, get out of my house. If you don't, I will kill you, and actually points his weapon at both officers. They're looking right down the barrel of his gun at point-blank range. And what's so interesting is that the officers picked up intuitively that this man was probably mentally ill, and they were somehow able to find their way out of the house rather than shooting the man. And they could have done that, but they did not. And they get out of the house, they hide behind a tree, and then the man actually shoots at them, but hits the tree. So medics eventually arrive, and they coax the man out of the house and take him to the hospital and give him treatment. But the man is later arrested for felonious assault on a police officer, which is understandable. Those officers could have been killed. And during court, the defense attorney says to the officer who's on the stand now, he says, well, if my client really assaulted you and pointed a gun at you, why didn't you shoot him? Aren't you a trained killer? You're trained to shoot anyone who puts you in danger, right? Aren't you trained to shoot when a gun is pointed at you? And so the defense attorney was not very nice and ended up saying, if my client really pointed a weapon at you and he was so dangerous, then why didn't you shoot your gun? And the officer is shocked, by those questions, and he eventually stammers out and he says, I didn't take this job to shoot anybody. And you could have heard a pin drop in the courtroom. And the officer looks straight at the jury and he says, my job is not to shoot people. I took this job to help people. My job was to save this man's life. And the jury apparently believed him because the man was convicted of felonious assault.
Right.
So it's a heartwarming story about what we go through sometimes. Even when we make really good decisions, sometimes we still get attacked, whether it's by the public or a defense attorney, in court while we're testifying.
What is that old saying? No good deed ever goes unpunished?
That's right.
Ingrid, let me ask you a personal question. I don't know if this is out of line, but have you ever had to shoot someone?
No, thank God. It's just a terrible thing that sometimes happens with officers, and they never forget that, whether the person was considered a bad guy or not, because we all have, good things and bad things about us. We're all human beings, and when we actually have to shoot someone, it's terribly painful. And I don't think the public realizes the trauma that goes with that. Even when we have to shoot, what we call a bad person, because that person's still human. We're all human, and we all have, all sorts of issues inside of us. Everybody's, got their own set of, problems and issues to deal with. So most police officers feel really bad if they ever have to shoot someone.
Spirit of the Badge, 62 police stories of divine guidance, miracles, and intuition. Ingrid Dean will stay with us. One segment remains, and we'll come back, and perhaps we'll have time to work in a call or two, and maybe even share a story or two. My name is Richard Serrett. You're listening to The Conspiracy Show. Stay with us.
Keeping an eye on the New World Order. This is The Conspiracy Show with Richard Serrett.
All right. We couldn't let this evening go by without talking about police encounters with unexplained phenomena, UFOs perhaps. Tell us about the encounter back in 2002. This is Holland, Michigan.
Yes, this is a story that's being told by a retired police officer who had what he believes to be a genuine encounter with the classic gray 4-foot-tall aliens that are commonly seen in the science fiction movies and books. The ones with the large black almond-shaped eyes and the long, slender arms and legs. According to his story, they communicated with him telepathically. They said they needed his help. The officer remembers feeling paralyzed, standing in his backyard and looking up at a huge craft that was hovering over, and felt like he already knew these people but had forgotten, like he had met them before. And he remembers 2 other humans who he did not know, who were standing near him, who were also appeared to be paralyzed and breathing heavily like he was. And the next thing he remembers is a thunderous sound and a 200 to 300 foot wide opening in the night sky where the craft goes into, and then the sky closes shut. And then he says next thing he knows, he's back inside the house, and he draws a picture of the craft with his daughter's crayons, and he initially did not share his experience with his wife. But his daughter tells him the very next day that she woke up and saw a lot of bright flashing lights outside the roof dormer window. And instead of going back to bed, she went to sleep on the living room floor because the lights scared her. It's an amazing story, and I think that it takes courage for officers to share this type of a story because, people have various opinions on whether UFOs exist and aliens and extraterrestrials. So I found it very interesting and put it under unexplainable phenomena.
Yes, well, Gary Hesseltine, who has been on this program a number of times, actually has a huge database in the United Kingdom filled with police encounters with UFOs. And what is remarkable to me is, when we have these sightings from first responders, but particularly police, because they are trained observers. To me, they are, along with airline pilots, among the most credible witnesses. So there's an amazing story in here. It's actually a little grisly in parts because it involves a man who tried to kill his wife. 2 police officers who responded to the call were also shot. They were down. And essentially, kind of a SWAT team were called in. The wife was bleeding to death. Her arm had been blown off, and in order to save her, to get her out of that house, they had to take a life in order to save a life. Take us through this amazing story called The Amazing Shot.
It is amazing because it really reflects the way many police officers think when they have to make that decision to shoot someone. and the officer from this team had a lot of thoughts going through his head that he talks about. And intuitively, he doesn't want to shoot the man. For one, the man has Alzheimer's, and sometimes when you're in the progressed stage of that disease, there's a lot of anger that festers up. So he's ill, and he sees the man a couple times looking through a small window of his trailer, and he has a couple opportunities to shoot him, but he's struggling internally on whether to do that or not. But as you said, he's already hurt a woman very badly, and so he says a prayer that he doesn't hurt the man, even though he takes the shot. The end of the story is remarkable. It's very heartfelt because he takes the shot, but somehow the bullet shears off of the window and does not hit the man. And this is someone who is an expert shot. So he considered it a miracle, and that's why the story is called The Amazing Shot, because actually the bullet goes through the window, but it hits the man's shoulder, so it's not fatal. And everybody is okay, and you know, the man gets medical care, and the trooper feels a whole lot better. But he considers that an answered prayer,
right?
Because he really didn't want to kill the man, but they had to do something before the man killed his wife.
And I was correct. There were 2 officers also injured. They were down, correct?
Yes, I forgot about that part.
Well,
yeah, they were.
Because you know, when your colleagues have been injured, I mean, to show that kind of restraint in that situation is remarkable.
That's what I thought. It is remarkable because there's so much going through your mind and heart in a situation like that. And it all ended up positive. So that's what makes it heartfelt, is that his wish came true, and he didn't kill the man.
We just have time for one more story. Swimming out of body. That's a good story too, and it's told by a sheriff's deputy who comes to the aid of a drowning man. It takes place at night, and the man is in the middle of a very, very cold northern Michigan lake, and he's screaming for help because his canoe is tipped over, and he's freezing to death. So the deputy shares how he goes into the water and how his own body goes into shock from the freezing water filling up his uniform, and his whole respiratory system nearly shuts down, and he has an out-of-body experience. So, you know, this is an excellent swimmer who grew up in Florida, but he had never experienced such intense cold weather in northern Michigan in late November. So he shares about his survival instincts and everything that he does to save that man, and it's a great story. Have you had an encounter with the paranormal? I mean, we talked about your incredible prescient dream on the morning of 9/11, but what about the paranormal?
Well, I have certainly seen apparitions since I was young, and it did carry through in my police work. One particular incident that occurred, I consider it paranormal. I had just gotten home from work, from patrol, and it was thundering and lightning. It was very early morning hour. I fell asleep on the bed in my bedroom, which had a wooden frame around it, thank goodness, because this huge ball of lights came through the window and sat right in front of me, like 5 feet, hovering. And the ball of lights looked like little cut-up pieces of tinsel, like from a Christmas tree, and silvery, and they were making a sound like rats. You know, it was weird. And so I gripped the wooden sides of the bed because I intuitively knew it looked electrical. So the name of the story is The Electrical Guest. It's in Spirit of the Badge, and it hovered for a good 5 to 8 seconds, which seemed like eternity because it was at least 3 foot in diameter and shimmering. And then it's like it has intelligence, is what it looked like. It's like it was looking at me.
Ingrid, people will have to...
And then it just went into the wall and disappeared.
Wow. And they'll have to read the book to get the full story. Ingrid, thank you so much. Spirit of the Badge. It's been a delight meeting you and speaking with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All the best. Ingrid P. Dean.
Thank you.
My thanks to Owen Wolf and Ryan White. Back next week with a brand new program. In the meantime, don't be afraid. There's nothing concealed that won't be revealed, and nothing hidden that won't be made known. What you hear in the dark, speak in the light. What I say in a whisper, proclaim from the housetops. Move over, Aphrodite, I'm coming home. Good night.